Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
Happy holidays, my friend.
Happy holidays to you as well, and Happy New Year very soon.
Happy New Year this weekend. Yeah, I was going to say for me, but it's for both of us, and it's in fact for everyone.
Well, time travel. I did it a couple times at this point.
All right, fair enough. Happy holidays, happy upcoming New Year. I'm feeling a little nostalgic here at the end of the year. I thought maybe let's talk about how things went this year and in the world of Magic and what we loved about it and kind of what we're thinking about.
Absolutely. I mean, there's only a couple new previews, so would not hate looking at a little bit some of that. But in general, it seems like they've saved most of the Aether Revolt stuff for after the new year. And this gives us an excellent opportunity to kind of look back at the past year, the ups, the downs, the lessons learned, and some of the awesome, sweet technology that people have come up with.
Oh, but on that point, we do have a preview card that we will be showcasing next week, so tune back in for that.
Yes, okay, absolutely. That seems super, super, super exciting. As for this past year, it's been an awful good time hanging out with you every week on Top Level Podcast and kicking it with everybody listening to us at home on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere that people are finding and linking and sharing us, and to Patreon too. Our big thanks, including our Patron of the Year.
Patron of the Year.
That's probably going to sound terrible.
Roll with it. Patron of the Year is Alec W. is Patron of the Year.
Thank you, Alec.
Thank you so much, Alec. We really appreciate it. Top Level Podcast hearts you. We heart everyone who checks us out every week, all of our patrons, those who are not yet patrons, and also especially those waiting for, the Flores swimsuit calendar, which hasn't come out yet, but, probably piecemeal on Instagram. If you need another place to follow Top Level Podcast, I recommend Instagram.
Dude, I almost took some swimsuit photos. I gotta finish. It's tough though. Like, it's the dead of winter.
Yeah.
I need another 5 months. I'll be ready by Memorial Day.
Yeah.
I'll be ready.
Mark that in your calendars, Top Level Podcast fans. Patrick Chapin, Memorial Day, the colds of Denver.
As long as somebody, well, I don't know. I can't promise that I'll be. I mean, it might have to be in like Maui or something. Like I'll be somewhere sweet. But I mean, Denver's awesome. But if you're gonna shoot a swimsuit calendar, you gotta go somewhere swimsuity.
Yeah.
I guess Denver is, but not a lot of beaches. But at least it'll be nice. But yeah, if you happen to think of this, if anybody happens to remind us the show right before Memorial Day, but until then, what about Magic, man?
All right, so Alec W is our Patron of the Year, but let's move on to other topics. Patrick, what would you say was the deck of the year?
The deck of the year?
The deck of the year.
I don't know, maybe Eldrazi. I think Eldrazi aggro.
Eldrazi aggro in Modern?
No, in all formats. So I think there's something very transcendent about the Eldrazi aggro archetype. It's not every day that it's a new style of deck. I mean, it has a lot of similarities, of course, to to like Madness or Affinity or Goblins or whatever, right? But like, it really is a new kind of deck that has had a profound impact on every format. Much more so Modern than most. But the fact that it's like one of the like mainstream tier 1 strategies in Vintage is very interesting.
And I mean, there's been iterations of it in Standard even, with like the 2/1 flyers and putting +1/+1 counters on colorless creatures. I mean, obviously that's less pervasive than the Modern stuff, but I'd even say if you want to start channeling some of the offbeat, aggro-y, mixed, hybrid, positive incentives of Eldrazi, I played in this PPTQ, this modern PPTQ, a few weeks ago. I traveled to Utah, and I got my butt kicked by Ben Friedman, who also traveled a long way to play in that RPTQ. And I felt like the best... He was playing an Eldrazi aggro deck. I felt like the best Eldrazi draws were, like, reminiscent of, like, Infector Boggles, and then also able to fall back on, like, Hate Bears, Like, in Game 2, I had a good draw. I was just like... I had Goblin Guide into double Searing Blaze, but he just drew 3 Noble Hierarchs. So he, like, out-tempoed me, even though I went Guide, Searing Blaze, and then just didn't die and then worshipped. Very Hate Bears-ish sort of thing, and then just stabilized to win. Except instead of with 2/2 creatures, with 4/4 creatures that were hemming me, or 5/5 Thundermaw Hellkites on the ground. And yeah,
That's actually part of what I find so fascinating about the Eldrazi aggro experience is that when you play into it, when you lean into it, you end up getting a diverse mix of powerful creatures. Like Thought Not Seer gives you some discard, right? And Reality Smasher gives you some haste, and plays into the discard strategy in an interesting way. And Matter Reshaper for additional card advantage. And normally an aggro strategy wouldn't be so spread out, like Eldrazi Displacer or Drowner of Hope. Each of these things adds an interesting dimension. And the fact that, like, Eldrazi Temple subsidizes, I think obviously the Eye of Ugin thing had a combination of too much power mixed with the inevitability.
Oh, we would add a very different modern format if they hadn't banned Eye of Ugin, obviously.
But I think that both of those decks contribute, both pre- and post-ban, are part of why Eldrazi Aggro is the deck of the year. Because it broke open that modern Pro Tour in a way that is basically unprecedented. And
LSV in, was it 2008, felt pretty similar to me.
You're saying Elves?
Yeah.
Well, so Elves, I do think Extended and Modern are very different formats. That was the old Extended format, and something that was of note was that Elves didn't lead to anything getting banned. It did very well in one weekend and was much more of a Dragonstorm fad. It still showed up, but it wasn't the first, second, or third best deck after that. Whereas Eldrazi Aggro not only showed up, every week it continued to perform better and better, and then they banned it. And after banning the best card in the deck, it's now it's one of the best decks in the format.
Still a great deck. But you know what I love
Tier 1.
You know what I love about it now? It's one of the best decks. Not unquestionably the best deck, There's going to be debate about which is the best deck. A lot of smart players are going to say Infect is the best deck.
Well, that's right? Because Infect is the best deck.
Yeah, so Dredge is an awfully good deck, depending on...
Dredge is tier 1.
Right? The burn decks are great, depending on who's showing up. But Bant Eldrazi...
Infect is tier 1. Dredge is tier 1. I'll give you all of that.
Bant Eldrazi is... I think burn is the best, but regardless. Bant Eldrazi is great, but it's great in a different sense. The Eldrazi deck from that Pro Tour, I guess there were like 3 different Eldrazi decks even in that top 8, right? But
there were 3 in the top 8.
Yeah, just in the top 8. But the one that just the redundancies around the double lands and getting discounts on the creatures for aggro purposes, you kind of didn't have to try very hard once the template was there in front of you. But what I love about the Bant Eldrazi deck that exists right now in Modern is it's so customizable. There's so much improvisation to it. Like, what's the name of the 2/1 flyer that makes a 1/1? Like just the little guy. What's his name?
The Eldrazi Sky Spawner?
Yeah, Eldrazi Sky Spawner. So I just was thinking about this situation where Ben's got me under a worship. I just need to draw a pad to exile. Or, like, chain together some burn cards. I'm going to win this game. I've gotten to, like, -13, right? But, he's not going below 1. And then he draws a Sky Spawner. And I'm just like, am I really going to lose to the 1/1s? Like, it's just one more body I have to deal with. But it's so powerfully synergistic in the frame that he had already built, you know? And then the card is such a great rate in that deck. It's actually a pretty good rate in some other
it's totally
decks, right?
fine.
But it's great in that deck.
Right.
And you can put together these synergies that they're pretty cool. Like, it's not abusive to play Cavern of Souls and say Eldrazi with it. Or the second Cavern of Souls says human, right? Like, I think...
Right,
like,
but the fact that in Modern, you know, compared to the power level of Modern anyway, the Eldrazi Displacer Blinking Drowner of Hope, that's not, like, I mean, that is a great combo. But that's not, like, it's not ruining anything. That's just a cool thing that, in the context of Modern, to have the option or the ability to set that up.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think it's like, to me, it's a little reminiscent of when Yosei was playable in large formats. You know, like, here's this card, it's real expensive. You know, it's standout in Standard, but, you know, where do we actually see this being played in larger formats? Or, you know, Kokusho was played and extended a little bit. You know, I love seeing, like, this big, gigantic card, costs a ton of mana, it's like a reasonable rate on its face, but when you put it in the right shell, it does so much more work than is implied by the card itself. It races and defends you and synergizes with the rest of your team.
So I think that it's important to note the difference between Eldrazi Temple and Ayavugan, because I actually think that Magic would be better if there were more Eldrazi Temples. I think that it would be. I think Wizards should actually be pushing Eldrazi Temple's style of designs more often. I just think that they should be much more strict about avoiding Ayavugan type problems. So the key difference is, and they actually make more Eldrazi. With cost reduction, they can't help themselves. They so often make them Ayavugan instead of Eldrazi Temple. And I think that historically, they conflict. I think that there was a fear early on because of cards like Ancient Tomb and Tolarian Academy and Mishra's Workshop. So cards like from a long time ago, City of Traders, Crystal Vein, lands that made more than one mana were they were thought of as being the problem. And even to, you know, current times, we saw Nykthos is arguably one of the, like, it is questionable that Nykthos was as strong as it was.
I think
right?
Nykthos was fine. You invest a little to
I think Nykthos mostly worked out. It exacerbated some other issues like that white enchantment that they should not have pushed so hard, where you get to, like, gain 1 billion life and play all your guys face down as 2/2s. But regardless, it's not the land making 2 that is fundamentally broken. It is the interaction between lands that make 2 and the cards that can have their cost effectively reduced by them. And Ancient Tomb and City of Traders could reduce the cost of any card that costs 2 colorless mana, right, or more.
You think that these things are explorable space?
Yes,
you know, legitimately
much more explorable space.
But that
more. I think they should be doing a lot more of this kind of thing, and not just with mana. It's part of it is the cost reduction aspect. But let me give you an example of a way where they've done the Eldrazi Temple experience, but 100 times. Lords, Goblin Kings.
Yeah,
they've made 100 Goblin Kings, and I think that when they make new Goblin Kings, they're still sweet. Because you can make a Goblin King for each new tribe as long as you give it its own flavor, its own story, something, right? I think that's such rich space. And I think that one of the mistakes they've made in the past regarding cost reduction and how it relates to linears is that they make it a multiplier instead of additive. So stats, as it turns out, are a safe thing to be a multiplier because of the inherent cost both in mana and of material. But with cost reduction, I think that they would be so much better served by having more, you get 1 extra. Like, let me give you an example of a time that Eldrazi Temple has succeeded. Auntie's Hovel. It's a black-red dual land from Lorwyn, as you know, that comes into play tapped, But if you show your opponent a goblin from your hand, you get it untapped. So you get to turn your guild gate into a Badlands if you just have goblins. Having goblins at all is the easiest ask in the world, but you get an extra mana as a payoff. That's great. I think you can go a step further and have some more.
What about the Tri-land, right? The green, black, white one.
Yep.
That if you have a tree,
Murmuring Bosk.
So that was actually, I think, an even better example, because if you remember back to the Kai's comeback Pro Tour, with Brad and Kibler in the top 8, playing that Murmuring Bosk. The thing that's interesting about it is that land in that format was just a little above and beyond everything else that was available, and because of that, you had these great players like Kibler and Brad in a large format like Extended, figuring out how they could play Tree Folk to take advantage of a Tri-land when other people didn't. A Tri-land that came into play untapped, potentially. When other people were, stuck on. I mean, I guess Paul won with a one-color deck, right? But this was a source of creativity.
That Pro Tour was actually very much bound by the mana. All the most successful strategies were a function of what mana is possible. And you're absolutely right that getting to take advantage of a Tree Folk synergy by giving you one extra mana opened up some really creative deck building space. And it wasn't like the Tree Folk tribe was busted.
No, it wasn't even played in Standard. Sweet. That was the thing that was interesting, right?
He was playing Standard some.
Not as a tribe, right? Like,
oh no, just Doran. Sometimes you
Doran
get your Tri-land.
Was gas, right? But in Extended, I thought that was really impressive because they got to take advantage of this Tri-land. And, Paul won in part because he had this deck that was really super tight with Flagstones of Trocaire, but didn't have color restraints at all. Most or all of his lands came into play untapped. That was a different sort of superpower that he got from his mana base.
The point, though, of the tribal synergy giving you a payoff of making your dual land untapped, that's part of the experience. That's giving you one extra Lotus Petal. But I think you can go even further. Now, it's hard because the granularity of mana is a tricky thing, right? Like, the difference between 1 and 2 mana is night and day. And we don't exactly have 1.3 mana as easily generated. However, we effectively WotC could already design to this. Like, if a tribe, like, take the Eldrazi, for instance. If you're just playing the Eldrazi straight up, it's not good enough for Modern. It takes Eldrazi Temple to make it good enough. You're not getting them. You're not getting it as a Soul Ring all the time. You're only getting it as a Soul Ring a certain distribution of the time, a certain percentage of the time, and you're wasting some of that mana some of the time. Anyway, my point is, I think that they should be doing a lot more of stuff like. I mean, imagine if there was a card that. Imagine if. You pick a tribe that you actually. I'm not recommending this exact tribe, but just off the top of my head, if you were to imagine that that there was a land that if you imagine a land that tapped for a colorless, or a mana of any color for a dwarf, and if you have a dwarf already in play. It can produce 2 mana to be only used for a dwarf. That would be sweet. I don't know what obviously you could balance all these things, but my point is that I think that they should be exploring more space for allowing uneven, you coming out of the gate, spending and getting mana in a way that's not the exact same from game to game to game. I think. Oh, go ahead.
I think I understand where you're coming from, so let me see if I can articulate this using some different tribal examples, right? Mm-hmm. If you think about it, I'm just talking about in Standard, right? Because this card hasn't exactly snapped Modern in half since coming back. But Bitter Blossom. Mm-hmm. There was the cliche that, turn 2 Bitter Blossom and Fairies, man, it's game, right? In Standard when it was
Well, in fact, in turn 1 Visions, turn 2 Bitter Blossom was thought of as the fix.
Yeah, that's game, right? But, and Bitter Blossom did really interesting things. Among other things, it was an enchantment that was tribal, so it actually gave you defense against volcanic fallout if you had a Mistbind click, right? Like, that was kind of a really weird... I hated that personally, right? You invest all of these cards in trying to specifically fight against certain parts of the fairy deck, and the fact that this enchantment is a fairy gives them this kind of, in my opinion, unfair defensive measure. But that card was, it had a bunch of extra things you could do in fairies, but it was actually a great and highly serviceable card in, like, Lightning Beatdown. Right? It was just different. And that you could play it in this deck. It didn't have all the bells and whistles, like you're saying. Maybe the dwarf card you were talking about is perfectly reasonable just to play. But it gives you double the efficacy when you're committing to playing dwarves. But it's still fine.
Well, and it's particularly notable that the legendary 3-cost exemplar has an X activated ability. So, like, every mana is useful. So, like, even if you have 5 land in play and nothing in your deck costs more than 3 or more than 4, if you tap this land, get an extra mana, play the dwarf, that just means the X can be 1 higher when you crew them immediately. So being able to take advantage of all that extra mana is sweet also.
So here's a question.
Yeah.
Card we focused on last week, Oath of Ajani. Do you think that card is more of an Eye of Ugin or more of an Eldrazi Temple?
Well, so it's tricky because it would be Eye of Ugin except for the fact that reducing the cost of Planeswalkers. Planeswalkers is a tribe. It's definitely Eye of Ugin, without question. But they do that all the time, and that's actually the thing I wish they would do less of. I think it's fine to do them, and I think actually Planeswalkers is one of the safest places, just because, unless they can't help themselves and they make them sick too, But the Planeswalkers...
you'd have to make like a blue and 1 Planeswalker, I think, at some point for it to be that bad.
The key difference is that Ajani is reducing the cost of cards that cost 3 to 2, and cards that cost 4 to 3, and cards that cost 6 to 5. Eye of Ugin reduced the cost of cards that cost 2 to 0.
Oh, yeah, that was a big difference.
And cards that cost 3 to 1. And the problem I have with Eye of Ugin is when you are able to save mana, when you're able to reliably save more than half the mana on multiple cards in a turn, it just becomes Storm. It goes off the deep end, the gap. People can't play very many cards that are supposed to cost 2 for free on the first turn before you have a problem.
Yeah,
right.
Just as a player who's very familiar with Infect or with Naya and Boros in Modern, just the fact that your decks are mostly 1 and 2 casting cost cards is such a huge advantage when you're playing against people who have 4 casting cost spells. Like, this is so much more extreme in the original Eldrazi deck. Like, you just look at it's just like total Adam Yurchik magic, right? You're just like, here's my hand, it's in play, go. Can you beat my 14 mana worth of cards that I played in the first 2 turns with your fair spell? Probably not, right?
No. So actually, to give credit where credit's due, Aether Revolt, one of the things I'm excited about is that they have an Eldrazi Temple form of affinity instead of an Eye of Ugin form of affinity. See, I actually think Affinity gets a bad rap. It has bad branding because it was the name of such a busted strategy. I do think that the mechanic itself is flawed, and I think that Improvise is a much better mechanic than Affinity from a game health perspective. See, the problem with Affinity was that it was a scalable Eye of Ugin, right? Like, everything's just Eye of Ugin all the time. And the end result is that whenever your Affinity deck is doing any Affinity stuff, and obviously nowadays most of the Affinity stuff doesn't even involve the Affinity mechanic anymore. But at the time, when it was so dominant in Standard, you could just play all your cards without spending any mana on them. And the problem was that they all begat each other. Improvise caps everything so that while you're getting paid from all your artifacts every turn, you're only getting one bonus, just like Eldrazi Temple. Eldrazi Temple can give you a bonus mana every turn, but it's only giving you one bonus mana every turn. Improvise can make all your random artifacts give you a bonus mana every turn, but they're only giving you one bonus mana every turn. Affinity, the problem with Affinity was that all your artifacts gave you all the bonus mana every turn, so every card ended up just free when you got to a critical mass. And that just wasn't... It's like Storm is not as interesting of a mechanic as, for instance, Flashback or Cascade. And I'm not saying that, like, Cascade has other problems because of the variants or whatever you could say, but like when you do the quest and you get the bonus, that's really fun. And when something sometimes does one thing and you can sometimes make it even more than the sum of its parts, it's just that when the Cascade card is, for instance, if Cascade had been in Standard at the same time as Hypergenesis and Living End, it would have been...
not very fun.
It was, like... It's not a great thing to be pushed in a way if the support is there. I mean, the cards obviously printed not too far from each other, but I mean, my point is that the Cascade mechanic was primarily you get one extra thing for free.
So I think that I kind of get where you're coming from. So if you're going to use Cascade to cast Living End or Hypergenesis, the Cascade is like this end point, which is like when you cast Yawgmoth's Will in Vintage.
Yes, right? Yes, exactly.
It's an end point, right?
Right.
Versus when I super enjoyed playing Cascade in Standard. I think that Lifetime, it's my favorite strategy to have ever played, honestly. Where I felt like I was always getting a little more value, but my cards were like interactive for the most part. I hate to say fair, right? That makes me sound like I'm a dope, right? But my cards are pretty good. They're doing things. But I love the feeling of like building my own Cruel Ultimatum. You know what I mean? You cast like an Enlisted Worm, and sometimes you're like, Enlisted Worm, Bituminous Blast, Bloodbraid Elf, Esper Charm, and like you just did it all. And like that felt like such a cool accomplishment. Like every single time you did that. And sometimes it was just pretty good. It was just a 3-for-1 or just a 2-for-1 that leaves you with like a huge body, which that's also pretty good. But when you could build your own Cruel Ultimatum, that was wonderful.
So that actually speaks very much to the sort of difference. Like I think you nailed it. Where when you cast Yawgmoth's Will, all the stuff that follows. I mean, and it was different when Yawgmoth's Will was in Standard to some degree, or Block, I should say. Yawgmoth's Will was merely extremely good in some formats, but Yawgmoth's Will was actually a very, very interesting card. Like it's been a while, but the truth is the use of Yawgmoth's Will in like Napster style decks, like any amount of Yawgmoth's Will to help power Dark Rituals and Sickens and Baubles or Scourges or Duress or Expunge, whatever. If you're just casting value cards off your Yawgmoth's Will, and the Dark Ritual was only because of how, the nature of the rest of the format, or else that could be problematic. But the point being that when Yawgmoth's Will was a value card, it was super sweet.
Yeah, it also
was super sweet.
Interesting, and also leads to, meaningful strategic decisions. Like this one of my most memorable moments on camera actually is Chris Benefell versus John Finkel when John's playing the Napster deck at the finals of U.S. Nationals in 2000, and John and Chris has the card Hammer of Bogardon in his graveyard, right, which is the strongest card in his deck against John's deck. So John has like Phyrexian Negator as one of his main ways to win. So Hammer of Bogardon is actually like that could be really bad for a player with Negator, right? Over the course of a very long game. For those of you who don't know, Phyrexian Negator, when it takes damage, you have to sacrifice a permanent. So the ability to, once you get to 8, if you could like make the opponent sacrifice 3 permanents per turn, that's a big deal. You might say, hey, why doesn't John just sacrifice the Negator? He didn't have that many creatures, so whether he had even the option to do so is a question, right? So at one point, John cycles the card Rapid Decay, right? And Randy Buehler is just like jumping out of his chair. He's like, why is he cycling that Rapid Decay? because the Rapid Decay is one of John's few cards that can handle a card that's in the graveyard already. And the answer was that John was going to set up for Yawgmoth's Will, and he was just going to play the Rapid Decay out of his graveyard, right? But, a different player might have been more conservative with the Rapid Decay, maybe so he could get multiple uses out of it. But, and I just thought that was a really interesting fork there.
Yep, and I think that that's another example of it being even more gameplay than, Cascade has some with the deck building, but like you were mentioning with Yawgmoth's Will, you could actually set it up. It would be almost as if it was like, imagine if Cascade was around at the same time as Scrylands. You know what I mean? Oh. Where there's a little bit of ability to set it up. And I think that Cascade, when it's get one extra thing for free, and it's a smaller, cheaper thing, that sort of experience could be fundamentally good. I think that the balance around some of the Cascade cards, it's not clear, but it actually worked out pretty good. It led to a pretty good format, all things considered. But the problem I have with going, like, if you Cascade into Living End or Hypergenesis, is that you're not actually getting a thing for free. You're getting a thing that's actually much more expensive that makes all your things free.
Well, I think that in my verbiage, I just say you're taking this thing which is very interesting when it's used as part of a process, and you're just using it you're just putting a period at the end of a sentence, right? You're saying, I cast this card, it costs 3, the game is basically going to end, right? Like, I have a 10/10 unstoppable creature, it's going to kill you in 2 swings, you can't block it, right? Or I'm going to draw 40 cards, they're all going to go and play because they're all Black Lotuses, even though they all stink. That's the thing that's happening with this, versus I'm going to play this card and there's going to still be another 6 turns of play. I'm just at an advantage over the course of at least 1 or 2 of those next 6 turns. And
it's sort of like the difference between Etched Champion and Cranioplating, in that Etched Champion is something some of the time, and it's something else. And now that one is perhaps not the cleanest example because of how often is the second rather than the first. However, Mox Opal might be an even better example. Mox Opal, now it's disappointing that it does nothing if you don't have it turned on, but there's something to the card is this good, and then it gets better, versus with Cranioplating, it just becomes infinity so quickly. And then it's just not interesting. It's like, oh, it's a 17 instead of a 16. Okay, sure.
So you've argued with great persuasiveness and passion that Eldrazi Aggro is the deck of the year. I actually had that only as my number 2. I haven't.
What was your number 1?
I like Green-White Tokens as my number 1.
I don't know. Green-White Tokens is a great deck. Great deck. Possibly the best standard deck of the year. The fact that the Eldrazi Aggro deck has transcended all formats, that it's a good legacy deck, and that it's like a Tier 1 vintage strategy, 2 different Tier 1 vintage strategies, and it actually got banned in the last Modern Pro Tour. And it was enough to convince people to let Modern not have a
put a nail in the coffin of Modern as a Pro Tour format.
Right. And, just to be clear, I think Modern's going to be back as a Pro Tour format eventually. I just think that Modern works better as a Pro Tour format if it's more like once every 3 years. You know what I mean? Give it a chance to evolve and grow, and give people a chance to play with all their toys without needing to ban something to make sure it's different. If you wait 3 years, there's going to be enough new stuff, and the format's going to have evolved enough that they won't need to keep banning stuff.
So I get you. I actually think you're probably right. I can just tell you what my thought process is on this.
Yep.
One of them was, obviously, it was the winner of the first Standard Pro Tour of the year. That's a thing.
But it was also the beginning of, okay, keep going. I'll let you finish.
It was so successful in the Grand Prix over the course of that format, and then had such interesting variations and interplay that came out of it. Everything from Raphael Levy and his Chandras that
Chandra no red.
Yeah, you could only Chandra off of the Oath, to whether or not you were going to play with a lot of evolutionary leaps and hangerback walkers, to Osip and all of his tragic arrogances, for a deck that was fairly set with regards to, you have to play at least this many lands, you have to play at least this 8-pack of Planeswalkers, and even the angel variations, right? There was the late version that had a ton of different angels that you would play that could go up to Bruna, that I thought that deck was really interesting design space for standard, but you're probably right. I think like the Eldrazi I think transcendent is the right word for that. But sure, did you have another comment on it?
No, I think you're right. I just think the green and white deck very cool. It was sort of marking the transition away from the format was sweet before. And I think that green-white tokens was in this weird space of being there was good variation, good exploration, but it was right at the cusp, right at the edge of the format transitioning into kind of a place that I think is less interesting. So green-white tokens might look good by comparison compared to what was to follow. But I think that in the grand scheme of things, 10 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to be talking about Eldrazi aggro. We're not going to be talking about green-white tokens as much.
I think you're 100% right. However, what do you think about the creature of the year? Do you have an idea about what you think of the creature of the year is?
And I think it's got to be Emrakul the Promised End.
Yeah, I have a very different opinion.
What's your answer?
I got to go with Archangel Avacyn. Archangel Avacyn...
I think that's a good choice.
Won the first Standard Pro Tour, won the second Standard Pro Tour, finals the third Standard Pro Tour of the year.
Yep.
Emrakul was, didn't win. I mean, finals the second one, but, Archangel... And not only that, right? If you look at the most dominating standard decks of the most recent Pro Tour that didn't win, but then went on to be, a much more dominant deck post-Pro Tour, for Archangel Avacyn's again. I mean, that guy is... That gal, that angel, it's something else.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good card, and I think it's a brilliant design. I think that there's some sweet, awesome stuff that it does. I'm a big fan of a lot of aspects of the card. I just think that at a certain point, if you're talking about the card of the year, it's like at risk of getting too off topic, somebody doesn't win Person of the Year for being the most popular person.
Oh no, they don't.
But you can be even infamy can go along with influence. Emrakul is definitely infamous. Emrakul is... first of all, Emrakul hasn't had enough Pro Tours. It has done really well in every Pro Tour it's been legal.
One fewer Pro Tour than Archangel Avacyn, right?
Right, but, has Emrakul ever failed the top 8?
No.
And it has largely defined every aspect of so many... look at the breakout decks from... the breakout, for instance, Emrakul being used with in Black Green Delirium versus Emrakul being used in Aetherworks Marvel, right? Or Emrakul being used in the Teamer decks, the Teamer Eldrazi decks, versus at its first Pro Tour versus Emrakul being used in those Black Green Delirium decks.
So I get it. Emrakul's used as a bullet in
not even just a bullet. Some decks use lots of Emrakuls. That Pro Tour,
the Black Green deck, it's often a bullet, right?
Yes.
Well, with
often
it's Traverse Uvenwald. It's often a 3 or a 4 of in Marvel decks because they just want to have a high redundancy of hit, right? The Teamers...
There was the Pantheon, the awesome Pantheon Teamer combo one that used several.
Yeah, so I am agreeing with you on Emrakul and the versatility of the types of decks that it can be used in, but I would just, if you look at Archangel Avacyn, if you just look at Archangel Avacyn in its 3, its win-win finals, look at it like this, right? Win number 1, Archangel Avacyn, green-white.
Yep.
It's just a good card. It doesn't have particular synergy. It's just a good card that could be played in these colors, right? And it was a great card in those colors.
And it was what they needed. There, it got a lot of value out of both giving you instant speed interaction and an answer to sweepers.
and it was just a good card. Now, and if you look at in the black-white deck that Lucas Blohan played, this was a card where you have a deck like Black-White Control, which was an established deck in the format, had been played by Owen Turtenwald and others at a high level of success for months. It was the interplay of the new Planeswalker Liliana, which demands that you play creatures, right? That gives a different dimension to an existing archetype, right? And it's not even that particularly special in Black-White. It's just the best card that you could play given the frame. Liliana is the card you want to play, right? Liliana has certain demands. Archangel Avacyn is the card that best fits those demands for the construction of this deck. If you go to the World Championship, right? Look at what Brian Braun-Dunes did with Archangel Avacyn. I mean, Archangel Avacyn with cards like Spellquell. Am I thinking of the right deck? I'm sorry. With is this not
Company? Yeah. Like when you like the fact that I think you're convincing me. The fact that Archangel Avacyn has been a rightful all-star in green-white tokens, black-white control, Bant Coco, blue-white spirits. Archangel Avacyn has shown up successfully in vehicles decks. It's shown up in Jeskai Control. It's shown up in blue-white control. It's shown up. I think you're right. Archangel Avacyn has been a true superstar in so many strategies, used for so many different reasons, and it has had so much success. And it's not like Emrakul the Promised End has revolutionized Modern, right? Like it barely shows up fringe in Modern, so I don't think you can even like count too much the difference. I think that Emrakul is slightly more impactful in powered formats, but by such a small amount. I think you're right. I think even though Emrakul I think is a bigger, I think Emrakul is fundamentally a flawed design mistake. It's a design mistake and fundamentally flawed as a concept to be pushed. Whereas I think Archangel Avacyn is a true masterpiece. I think Archangel Avacyn is an absolutely remarkable design. And I think that at the end of the day, even though Emrakul has dominated recent conversation, if you take a more holistic view, after you point out all those different decks, I got to give it to you. I think I would give the nod to Archangel Avacyn.
So, thank you.
In terms of impact, not just fun to play or whatever. I think that Archangel Avacyn has been more influential.
Archangel Avacyn's much more fun to play and play against, but that's a different question. But then just two other things. Archangel Avacyn and Jeskai Control and Carlos Romeo's deck, it's just Sarah Angel Plus in that deck, which, by the way, is exactly what that deck wanted, right? But that's different than its play in other decks. And then finally, I think even like the current synergy of Archangel Avacyn plus Selfless.
Well, it's not just no. It's not just Sarah Angel.
It's Sarah Angel Plus.
Flash is night and day.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And
the fact that it's with 10 counter spells.
And the fact that it's Flash and also indestructible that turn makes it often a Necrotal. The fact that it interacts so strongly against it's so effective against planeswalkers, and then also so good against haste, because like your opponent spent all their mana on their haste creature, and then you just block it, kill it, boom.
Yeah, or against a shambling vent or something, right? That often they commit a ton of their mana to just come in when they think that the coast might be clear. But anyway, just Selfless Spirit combo in Standard with blue-white spirits or blue-white flash rather is just. Whew, it's so impressive. Just like you turn your Selfless Spirit into a fireball.
Right.
What do you think about how about Planeswalker of the Year? To me it's between Liliana and Gideon. Is that do you think that's fair?
No.
No? Okay.
Gideon, no, I don't think you can count Gideon.
He predates. Yeah, he's
okay. Gideon. You could argue Gideon is Planeswalker of the Year 2015. I just don't think it's. I mean, maybe it's weird. It's like when a pop song comes out in fall, or if a pop song comes out in November, are you supposed to count it for Song of the Year or not? I think that if you count Gideon, then it should be Gideon, and if you don't count Gideon because he came out in 2015, then it should be Liliana.
I can respect that answer.
what's your answer? I assume that it's similar or just Gideon.
I would have answered Gideon, but I think you're right. Gideon, was a little too early, but he was just been so dominant all year. I felt like it should be Gideon, but I think you're right. It should on the conditions that you're talking about. Liliana is the better choice.
And I don't get me wrong, there's been some great Planeswalkers this year. Like Chandra, Torch of Defiance, Liliana, the Last Hope, Nahiri, the Harbinger, Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. There's lots. Tamio, Sorin. There's so many sweet ones. It's just Chandra, Flamecaller. I think Gideon is undeniably the highest impact if you're willing to go back that far.
But if you're going to look at the more recent Planeswalkers for 2016, both Liliana and the new 4-mana Chandra are played in multiple formats now, right? Gideon doesn't see a lot of love in Modern, right? It's Gideon.
No, he does.
Does he? Okay.
Oh yeah. Gideon 4 does. Yeah, Gideon 4 actually shows up in Legacy.
I hadn't seen that. Who really shows up in big formats, though, is Nahiri. Yes,
Nahiri works very well with the original Emrakul.
Yep.
So what's your pick for artifact of the year?
I'm going to have to go with Aetherworks Marvel on this one, Patrick.
Really?
Yeah.
I feel like it's Smuggler's Copter.
I feel like either of these is the right answer. I think Smuggler's Copter is a much more fun card to play.
32 for 32. When was the last time an artifact a card put 32 copies in the top 8?
A card? 2011. We had 32 Preordains and 32 Jace the Mind Sculptors.
Right, so that's a once every 5 years. Smuggler's Copter is a once every 5 years type of phenomenon. Smuggler's Copter is more like Masticore, whereas Aetherworks Marvel is more like Memory Jar. Memory Jar.
I think
Masticore had a bigger impact than Memory Jar.
Yeah, but I think that you're insulting Smuggler's Copter by calling it Masticore. I think Smuggler's Copter.
No. What I meant was I don't mean power level. It's more Jite or Skull Clamp.
Yeah.
What I mean is it's less than Skull Clamp, but it's about Jite. It's just that Masticore was used 100 ways by 100 people, and I think the Smuggler's Copter will be too.
I think Masticore's like a Swiss Army knife, right? Like beatdown decks played it in the sideboard to get bigger, and control decks played it as a catch-all, right? Like. This card will do every single thing that I need a card to do. It'll finish the game for me. It'll defend me a little bit. It'll block. It'll give me something to do with my islands I just thwarted. But yeah, so it's what I feel like it's not fair because it's not an artifact, but Dismember. Do you remember there were all those top 8s like in 2000 and maybe 2011, 2012, where you would have 32 Dismembers? Even if a lot of them were in the sideboards.
Yeah, but Dismember was I would argue Dismember was a mistake.
A gross mistake. It's still one of the most highly played cards in Modern.
The card, it's very heavily played in Legacy, and for good reason, because it's such a who's who of mistakes. So, Colorless Plow is just...
Yeah,
Anyway.
Mono Green can plow.
The issue with Smuggler's Copter versus Aetherworks Marvel in today, I think that at the end of the day, already Smuggler's Copter has been more impactful, more influential. It's more popular. It's more successful. It's and I think its life is going to. I think it's going to outlive Aetherworks Marvel. I think that Smuggler's Copter is going to be quite popular for some time to come, whereas I think Aetherworks Marvel will fall off in terms of popularity when the Eldrazi rotate.
I'd actually also say that Smuggler's Copter is more interesting. That you have a card that's played in...
It's much more interesting.
These really aggressive black-red decks. It's used as a reanimation facilitator in some of these prized amalgams / haunted dead decks. It's used, obviously, in its most common usage in Standard right now in blue-white. But it's also in black-green, right? Remember, Ephro's black-green deck is a very different kind of deck than the kind of the black-green spiders, removal, emerge sort of decks that we see, and a lot of that was facilitated by Smuggler's Copter, and I think to a lesser extent Blossoming Defense.
Well, yeah, I think Smuggler's Copter and Blossoming Defense are both very interesting cards. The fact that Smuggler's Copter gives you some edge above and beyond what it says it's doing, so outside of just it being a 3/3 flyer, dodging and removal and looting and all that, you're getting little edges here and there, right? Like when you crew a creature that was summoning sick in order to contribute damage as though it was like haste, you're getting a little more than the sum of the parts. And when you loot away a scrap heap scrounger, you're getting a little more than the sum of the parts. You're getting an extra one, And when you loot away your second copy of a Planeswalker or a Legend, or if you're looting away the missing components that you have your fourth for Delirium, or whatever it is, you're getting a little more than the sum of the parts. And Aetherworks Marvel, by contrast, it's all or nothing, and the incentives it promotes are actually very perverse instead of healthy, and then the game is much less interesting, good or bad, right? Like Smuggler's Copter, the game gets more interesting. Aetherworks Marvel, it only gets more interesting if it creates a big swing in a way that was beneficial to whoever was losing, right? Like in general, it's not as interesting of gameplay. It's not like you're looking at your 6 and you're like, okay, how do I want to play this? What do I want this time? Do I want the Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot or Emrakul? I'm going to take Emrakul.
Well, yeah, but on balance, if you look at the Smuggler's Copter, you're talking about Scrap Heap Scrounger, like Smuggler's Copter and Esper. Smuggler's Copter, when you're playing some versions of Black-Red sometimes, it actually is a card advantage engine, right? If you dump both the Scrap Heap Scrounger and fuel for the Scrap Heap Scrounger just using the Smuggler's Copter over 2 turns, it actually just drew you a card. In addition,
right, but drawing a card is great.
No, it's awesome. It's very awesome. Different, right? Like you think of it. I think, well, maybe you don't. I think of it generally. Its most common usage is I'm playing blue-white. If I have a lead, I'm using it to filter so I hold the lead, right? So I'm using it to get Rattle Chains, Spell Queller, cards that help me. Maybe Archangel Avacyn, cards that help me hold the lead that I already have. Or separately, if I don't have the lead, it's one of the few cards that I have that helps me dig to my catch-up card, right? Whatever that catch-up, depending on the situation, right? Like, maybe I really need a Stasis Snare. It helps me dig to that, and those are its two modes, and one of them is just discarding lands, right?
Well, I was going to say, for me, it's actually, the in blue-white anyway, the most common thing for me is either using it to get up to make sure I can actually hit Archangel Avacyn on time, like I want to hit all my drops, or alternatively, making sure that I don't flood out. That I just have enough spells to stay ahead, or to find an answer to something. So for me, in blue-white, it's mostly about the looting as a form of hitting all your land drops and then stop hitting land drops. Whereas I think that it has such a different purpose in a variety of different decks. Like, obviously Black-Red has all the synergies, like whether it's Madness or the Scrounger or whatever, right? Like zombies that work in the graveyard.
Like everything from Fiery Temper, right, to
Prized Amalgam, maybe,
Prized Amalgams,
whatever.
Haunted Dead setups.
Fiery Temper, yeah, anything. Whereas I think that you can also, Smuggler's Copter in Delirium is actually quite interesting in that it adds an artifact. In addition to obviously looting sets up your Delirium, it's interesting because it's not like a Delirium deck is just full of artifacts, right? Like maybe you have a Pilgrim's Eye, maybe you have more. Maybe you have Noxious Gearhulk, or maybe you play Verdurous Gearhulks. But in general, Artifact is a valuable type for the purposes of making Emrakul cheaper or making Delirium easier. And Smuggler's Copter adds that. Additionally, in that deck, it depends on what version you play, but sometimes you just move counters over with Verdurous Gearhulk, and you can make a big threat that dodges a sweeper and flies. But it's also possible that you pitch a second copy of a legendary Kalidas. Or it's possible you pitch an extra Planeswalker you didn't need. Or maybe you pitch a creature when you have no creatures in your graveyard to ensure that your Liliana can draw you an extra card. There's so many ways that you can use the card. Yep. All right. Well, what's your pick for land of the year?
I'm gonna have to go with Aether Hub, Patrick.
Me too.
I mean, even without the energy aggro,
that was my preview card.
I mean, you know how I feel about Tendo Ice Bridge. I put Tendo Ice Bridge in like every deck I could, and Aether is just the better Tendo Ice Bridge.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think it was actually really smart. That's such a good way to, that's an Eldrazi temple of sorts. It's not really all the way Eldrazi temple so much as it's like Secluded Glen. You know, you're getting one free bonus thing for your synergy. That's cool. I think Aether Hub, awesome card, and has proven to be, it's proven to be effective in aggro, combo, control. I don't think anybody would describe Aether Hub as being busted, but it's helped enable a lot of the other energy stuff in a really healthy, positive way, and it has been very popular, and I expect it will be beyond the popularity of explicitly energy-based. Like, I think that people are just going to continue to do little things like have Glimmer of Genius power up their Aether Hub sometimes to help support their pain-free, untapped splash. Yeah,
or the opposite, right? Both are true. If you look at Aether Hub as kind of through the lens of Tendo Ice Bridge, I had this philosophy, and I think most players probably would describe this philosophy if they thought about it for a second, but maybe they haven't thought about it explicitly in this way. When you're making a deck, especially if you're trying to brew up or do something interesting with a stack of 60 or 75 cards, the capabilities of your deck emanate from the possibilities that are generated by your mana base, right? Like,
oh yeah,
whatever
classics v. Maushevitz.
Whatever your deck can do comes from what your mana can make possible, right? So I just think about when we were actually using the actual card Tendo Ice Bridge. And you say, like, well, my mono-red deck is sometimes behind against Tooth and Nail, right? But what if I just play 4 copies of this Tendo Ice Bridge and, like, 1 Swamp so that I can cast Cranial Extraction? Or how smooth can I make my Tron mana so I can justify a second color, right? Like, I'm devoting 12 colorless lands to a deck that has potentially aggressive color requirements on turn 2, turn 3, and turn 4. How do I make this smooth? And that card was really helpful to me as a deck designer when it was legal and standard. And I look at Aether Hub today, and you say, well, what if I'm just going to throw this out there because this isn't a real archetype in standard right now. What if I wanted to make a green-white aggro deck, right? It's like, I like the following X great creatures to be played in green-white aggro, and I'm going to add Blossoming Defense to this. Well, you know what? We have 8 direct green-white dual lands that are pretty good, but with Aether Hub, we actually have 12. What are the capabilities I have now if I have this many potential untapped green-white dual lands? Can I get the jump on somebody? Am I going to be fast enough to be competitive?
Yep. It's a potent form of mana fixing that comes with a price, and it's not the usual axis of paying life for having a tap land. So it's interesting,
I love how it's limited use, but that you actually get some potential bonuses if you're playing with Eldrazi, or you don't need to be able to recur the mana colors over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting the way that it interacts with stuff like Harness Lightning, for instance. That an Aether Hub can allow your Harness Lightning to kill an Archangel Avacyn.
Yep, for sure.
So what about Sorcery of the Year?
Sorcery of the Year. I think I want to say Radiant Flames.
Interesting, really. Despite it getting priced out by Spellqueller. Radiant Flames didn't even... I mean, that's in the Gideon space, too. It's not even...
maybe it's too far back. All right, I'm going to go with Crush of Tentacles.
That's interesting.
I just like that card. What do you think?
I think you do just like that card.
I just like that card.
Yeah, I think in terms of trying to look at the format as a whole, not or the all the sets as a whole, and not just not just the sweetest stuff of the year, but rather the most successful. I mean, So there's Traverse the Uvenwald, right? Like that's got to be like an early. Like that's got to be
that's
like
my new pick. You're right. That's the one.
Like, I mean, what else can really compare, right? Like there's Declaration in Stone, but I think that it's just not in the same league as Traverse.
Traverse is cross format. It's like Lay of the Land was already a good enough card to play in its era, right? It's like Lay of the Land and plus it's Demonic Tutor in the late game. It's this great bullet finder. It promotes the strategy that it also exploits.
You can do it a little or a lot.
Yeah. You can play 2 copies. You could play 4 copies. In Modern, you could have 1 copy. You could have 1 copy in your sideboard. It gets like your 1 Tarmogoyf sometimes. It's it's Traverse the Uvenwald for sure. No question.
What about Instance? I don't mind.
I like Harness Lightning.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So I was going to say Kozilek's Return.
Well, Harness Lightning is, I think it's in the Aether Hub space, right? It can be your only energy card, or more or less your only energy card, and it's still good. And then if you add it together with cards like Aether Hub or another Harness Lightning, right? Like, so your first Harness Lightning maybe will only do 1 or 2. Then you save up energy for later, and your second Harness Lightning is like, it's like a Dismember or whatever, deals 5. I think that's super flexible. Again, it's got circa 1 Pro Tour under its belt, and it was meeting in the finals, 4 against 4. I think that's why I like Harness Lightning, but it's certainly less interesting in terms of the deck design space than Kozilek's Return.
But if you just look at the total amount of impact Kozilek's Return has had, it's cross format, it's many different types of archetypes. The entire time it's been legal, it's been a defining influence in Standard. I don't know. I just feel like Kozilek's Return has been just such a monumental card. I mean, think about the fact. Well, what other card is getting people to play with a 7-mana 7/5 Annihilator 2, right? Or getting people to play with that the weird Eldrazi that let you take a card from exile, put it in their graveyard, and gain some life.
The card is super interesting, and one of the things that I like about Kozilek's Return a lot is that it's in the Bitter Blossom space, so you can just play it. It's just a good card to play. Instant speed Pyroclasm. If you're not going to play any particular synergies, it's one of the few red cards, red in quotes, that can kill a Master of Waves and all of its descendants, right? Like if you want to play it in a different format. Remember, we saw Kozilek's Return potentially be played in Ancestor decks to the Scred Red that was more successful in Modern. But when it's played like in its full form, like an Owen Turtenwald's T-Merge deck, it challenges your opponent. You say like, hey, how are you going to lay out this game? How many prize amalgams are you going to put into play? How many triggers are you going to put out there? What are you going to risk? Because if Kozilek returns, you could be in trouble. How much are you going to hold back? What are you going to, try to race with? And I love decks that are, I love cards rather that challenge the opponent to think.
That's fair. I do too. Enchantments. Not a lot of great options. There's Stasis Snare, I guess. That's sort of the year before. So there's Vessel of Nascency, right? There's Fevered Visions, and then there's I don't think you can count stuff like Deadweight or whatever. It just hasn't been that. I think Fevered Visions, Oath of Nissa. Vessel of Nascency is probably bigger than Oath of Nissa, though.
No way. Oath of Nissa. Oath of Nissa is.
And then there's also Always Watching.
Legs.
And there's also Always Watching.
I don't think I'd vote for Always Watching. I think that Fevered Visions, you can make an interesting case for that card.
Yeah, Fevered Visions was my initial pick. And there's also the enchantment that gave their guy a flying that came back from the graveyard.
Grifspoon.
The Grifspoon, yeah.
I think I like Fevered Visions as a choice over all those if we can't pick Stasis Snare.
And then I think that's. I mean, we hit them all, right? Like, I mean, there weren't exactly any tribal cards this year.
Well, I have one. Let's close it out for this ep. Who do you think the player of the year was?
The player of the year. Is it? So, like, it's weird because of Magic years breaking uneven compared to calendar years.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real good argument for Seth. I think there's always a really good argument for a lot. Actually, what about Luis?
Ooh.
Luis is kind of like, I mean, like, he just top-8'd all the Pro Tours he played in.
I mean, I think that's such an interesting idea. You know, I didn't have Luis on my short list of folks I was thinking of, but I think that he might be the best choice, and I think that it's awesome that the best choice is somebody who acquired Platinum and then took a year off and is currently on a hiatus.
Yeah, like, I think that...
I love that choice, actually.
I think that it's Luis, because it's not just... I mean, if you look at Luis, obviously Luis is one of the most influential figures in Magic history.
Top 5 Magic players of all time. No question if you're talking all time.
Like, in most categories. Like, are you talking about, like, in strength of play? Are you talking about in terms of community impact? In terms of advancing the culture, the game?
I mean, if you want to put enough overlapping Venn diagram circles, he's close to number 1, right? That's
right. He's certainly, you can make a good case. And I think that the impact that Luis has had this year has not exactly been small. Outside of top-8ing literally 3 Pro Tours and then dropping the mic, he's still doing, he's helping, like, he's one of the driving forces of, like, he's a really good commentator. He's a really good figure for doing coverage and for covering and helping promote the game, and the influence he's having in that area. I don't know. I just think that even if you set all that stuff aside, the man top-8'd 3 Pro Tours in a row and dropped the mic. I got to give it to Luis.
He dropped the mic. He picked the mic right back up. That's what he's going to do this year.
Yeah?
Yeah. No other votes. Luis Scott Vargas is no question.
Yep.
Finish it. He's player of the year. All right.
Although honorary mention, I think you got to give an honorary mention to, well, first of all, the player of the year, and also, I mean, like, I just think that there's a lot of awesome Magic players, and you know, like, I think that Owen, Ziggy, you know, like, I think Magic is definitely at a high point in terms of the quality. Like, there's so many strong players right now, but I think Luis definitely player of the year.
Cool. All right, so that's it for us for this year. We'll be back next year. In the meantime, if you want to follow us around or make sure you get all of our episodes, we are Top Level Podcast like everywhere. We are Top Level Podcast on Facebook, Top Level Podcast on Twitter, Top Level Podcast on Patreon. Thanks again to Alec W. Top Level Podcast now on YouTube and on Instagram. If you haven't subscribed yet on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed on iTunes or the subscription service of your choice, please subscribe. We would love it. I'm Michael J. Flores.
Patrick Chapin. See you guys next year.
Bye-bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge, so jail